Progress.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It is 5:31 p.m. Today is July 30th, 2026. We will call the special Board of Directors meeting to order. We will start with item number 1. Roll call, please.
Directors Weed,
Here.
Huang,
Here.
Gunther,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
and Akbari.
Here. Director Weed, will you lead us in the salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. With that, we will move to item number 3, public comments on matters on this notice of special meeting. Members of the public may address the board on any issues that are listed in the agenda. We will enforce a 5-minute time limit on all speakers. We'll start with any members of the public who are here in person. If you wish to make a comment, you can approach the speaker's podium.
And if you'd like, I can also do a little bit of housekeeping.
I apologize.
Yeah, no
Don't
problem.
housekeeping.
No
Yeah,
problem.
Let's do that and then we'll move into public comments.
No problem. I just wanted to welcome everybody to our board workshop this afternoon, special board meeting on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors. I'd like to welcome everybody's participation. My name is Ed Stevenson and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and presentation materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Again, thank you everybody for attending, and President Akbari, that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We'll now move on to item number 3, public comments. Is there any member of the public in person who wishes to make a comment? If not, I will look online. If any member of the public wants to make a comment, you can raise your hand in the Zoom app now. I see one member of the public, Mr. Yang Xiao. You'll have 5 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Yang Xiao, current city council member of City of Fremont, but I today attend this meeting in my personal capacity. This morning, learning that I would not withdraw my candidacy for Alameda County Water District Board Director, Ward 3, and I would not endorse the incumbent for his re-election. Director Paul Sethy over the phone
Not on topic.
gave me threat.
Excuse me, member of the public. This is the district's general counsel. President Akbari, this is a special board meeting tonight. And what we have on the agenda is public comments on matters that are on this notice of agenda. And it's starting to sound like this might not be on the agenda. This would have been totally appropriate if it were a regular board meeting. But since it's a special board meeting, the public comments need to be limited to what's on the agenda, which is really the financial workshop. So I just wanted to remind you what we have on the agenda, as well as the member of the public.
Understood. Apologies. I will then come back at the regular meeting and use the public forum on non-agendized items to tell my story again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Xiao. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak? I
Do not see any hands.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we will move on to item number 4, financial workshop for calendar year 2026, and I'll turn it to our general manager to kick off this item.
Great. Thank you, President Akbari. This evening's workshop is the first of 3 scheduled rate setting workshops that'll focus on the district's current and projected financial status, water rates and charges, financial planning assumptions, capital funding strategies, debt financing, the allocation between fixed and variable charges, drought surcharge approach and rates, customer service, billing, delinquencies and practices, and affordability considerations. That's a lot. And we're just getting started this evening. For this workshop, we're really focusing on really two major objectives. We're going to be providing a lot of information about the current and projected financial status of the district, the current water rate environment for the district and our comparator agencies, and an update on some of the key rate structure options that'll be available to the board. And we're looking for input from the board and from the public about the level of water rate adjustment, changes to our rate structure, and other topics that the board would like staff to bring back in our subsequent workshops on this topic. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our interim director of finance, Mr. Calvin Cho, to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, member of the board, staff, and member of the public. Tonight, we are beginning the district's rate setting financial workshop process. And joining me are Martin Coran, Financial Analyst Supervisor, Cassandra Cao, Senior Financial Analyst, Darren Hodge, Managing Director with PFM Financial Advisor, and Gabe Sasser, Project Manager with HF&H Consultants. Together, we will review the district's updated financial position, discuss the available rate setting, and financial options. And most importantly, we seek board's feedback to guide staff work during the upcoming workshops. So tonight's presentation is organized around three primary areas. First, we'll review the district's preliminary fiscal year ending 2026 financial results, key financial trends, and updates to the financial planning model. Second, we will discuss the rate setting scenarios evaluated by staff and the potential use of interim financing to fund the capital program. And finally, we will review several key rate design considerations, including the allocation between fixed and variable revenue, uniform versus tier rates, and the approach to drought surcharges. And we will conclude by going over board's direction from tonight, go over the next steps, and identify topics to bring back during future workshops, including affordability considerations and capital funding strategies. This rate setting process began with the budget workshop in May and the adoption of the amended mid-cycle budget in June. And today's workshop focuses on updated financial projection and rate options. And there are two, by the way, as well as the rate structure and drought surcharge considerations. At the August workshop, staff will return with the board's guidance from today and provide additional information regarding capital funding strategies, fixed and variable revenue allocation, and affordability considerations. The September workshop will address any remaining follow-up items, customer service and billing matters, delinquency practices, the proposed rate plan, and the protest process. The board is currently scheduled to consider issuing the rate notice in December and to consider approval of the final rate proposal in February 2027. The primary purpose of tonight's workshop is to receive board feedback. In particular, staff is seeking guidance regarding the preferred rate setting option, the approach to the district's rate structure, and the appropriate use of interim financing to fund capital program. We would also like to hear whether there is any additional information or analysis that the board would like staff to bring back during the August or September workshops. The intent is not necessarily to make every final decision tonight, but to provide sufficient direction for staff to continue developing the rate proposal. And this slide provides a reference for the acronym and technical terms that will be used throughout the presentation. A few of the terms that will appear frequently are CIP, or Capital Improvement Program, GF, or General Fund, HCF, which represents 748 gallons of water, and MGD, or million gallons per day. We'll explain any less familiar terms as they arise during the presentation. And now with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Coran, District's Financial Analysis Supervisor.
right, thank you, Mr. Cho. Good evening, members of the board, members of the public, and staff. My name is Martin Curran. I'm the Financial Analysis Supervisor. Earlier, Mr. Cho mentioned we have Darren Hodge from PFM. He will be joining us over Zoom this evening. And his colleague, Frederick Dilly, is here in the audience. He'll also be delivering a part of the presentation this evening. And then along with Gabe Sasser from HF&H, sitting right over here, he is also joined by Alex Santos. All right, so for this part of the presentation, I'll review the baseline assumptions in the amended mid-cycle budget, just as a reminder. So this includes a 5% water rate increase in fiscal year 27 and 28, then 4% annually thereafter. Fully funding the capital improvement program, $20 million per year in interim financing to fund the capital improvement program, so totaling $120 million over the planning horizon. Then forecasted revenues are based on long-term demands at 33.85 million gallons per day. Labor and benefit costs are consistent with the current contracts. In San Francisco, their rate increases, the first of which just came in effect July 1st, and rate increases of 7.4% per year for each of the next 2 years. Staff will continue to evaluate water supply reliability initiatives, and the last assumption, maintaining the aggressive contributions for pension and retiree health benefits to be fully funded by June 2032. This slide shows the general fund ending balance metric that was included with the amended mid-cycle budget. As you can see, at mid-cycle budget adoption, the low balance was $15.8 million below the target in fiscal year 31. Next up are the updates to the financial planning model since mid-cycle budget adoption. The first is updating for the fiscal year end 26 that just ended June 30th for the preliminary actual results. And as you can see on the screen, the district's general fund ending cash balance finished approximately $10.7 million above the estimate presented just a few weeks ago. The major reasons for this variance are, first off, $2.9 million of additional PFAS settlement, which was received at the end of June. Plus, we had water revenues ended up being about $500,000 higher than estimated. So we got a bump in demands during June. And there was an additional refund from the Department of Water Resources of approximately $500,000 based on the state's reconciliation. And then expenses were $6.8 million lower than estimate, mostly resulting from capital project schedules. The other major update was the addition of $51 million of new capital projects identified in the Water Resources Master Plan through fiscal year 35. Two of the major projects I'll mention on the screen are Southern Groundwater Facility and additional groundwater banking. Those are the two big ticket items. And then please recall that the cost estimates and schedules for the WRMP projects are preliminary, and many projects are dependent on or triggered by one another. Now we'll get into the key metrics from the financial planning model. With the updates we just discussed, we thought it is prudent to expand the planning horizon to show the board and public what these changes mean. So assuming 5% increases for the next 2 years and then 4% on out, which is included in the financial planning model, the general fund ending cash balance drops significantly below target balances starting in fiscal year 31, with a low of $77.6 million below target by fiscal year 35. The debt coverage ratio low year will be fiscal year 31 at 343%.
May I interrupt and ask a question, please?
Of course.
This assumes that there are no further rate increases beyond the 2 years that we have right now.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And it's
So I don't want to mislead the public that we're going into a severe financial crisis because we do have predictable rate increases.
correct.
Thank you.
The next two metrics on the slide illustrate that the district relies on non-operating revenues to cover operating expenses and other sources to fund all costs, including the capital program. So on the left side, the metric shows that operating revenues are projected to be sufficient to cover operating expenses this fiscal year, and then later years starting in fiscal year 33. On the right, the metric shows that when adding debt service and capital projects, other sources such as accumulated reserves and property taxes and grants and interest income are required to do these activities. Bless you. Now, the chart on the left shows projected build demands. And as I just mentioned earlier, we got a slight bump in June, so we ended at 33.63 million gallons per day compared to our original year-end estimate of 33.3 million gallons per day. So in the short term, we're expecting 33.85 MGD and then a slight increase to 33.94 MGD in the long term. The chart on the right shows the capital improvement program by funding source. General fund is in green. The facilities improvement fund is purple. Facilities renewal fund is orange, and debt financing is pink. So the general fund portion provides approximately $460 million over the planning horizon to the capital program. So that is about an average of $38 million per year. The interim financing provides approximately $20 million per year. $10 million per year in funding comes from the Facilities Improvement Fund, and about $1.5 million in funding comes from the Facilities Renewal Fund. It's on an annual basis. What is not part of this are the refunding revenue bonds that would be used to repay the interim financing. If we included those, we'd be double counting. So we want to avoid that. Yes, sir.
I was just saying this might be a good point to pause and just make sure everybody is informed and doesn't have any questions. We just took a look at the baseline condition plus some updates and wanted to make sure the board and the public understood what the condition looks like with those updates. So it's just a place to pause.
And Mr. Stevenson, when Director Sethy about the slide 10, I just want to make it clear. It's assuming 5%, and then 4% throughout. So there is 4% in that base model.
Thank you. Appreciate that. You know, a parameter that I think would be helpful would we look at the state guidelines for water conservation and consumption per person per day, and plot that as how much room do we have, headroom do we have in our financial planning. We've used a number where we've used more than what we had projected. Our projection was not based on any other than what our anticipated use was. It wasn't showing how it was relative to the legislative boundaries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I just quickly chime in on that. Yeah, you're right, and that's an observation that you had made during the water resources master planning work and so forth, and also our work related to water use efficiency and so forth, because that's where those regulatory unit-based per capita per day values come from. Generally, when we're talking about the financial planning model, we're talking about bulk overall customer demands, and we have to make certain assumptions about what those demands will be over time. And these are consistent with that same data that you saw in the water resources master planning, urban water management plan. It's consistent with the same data, but you're right, the units are different.
What I would appreciate from the staff for a subsequent meeting on slide number 10 is going back to the general fund ending balances. If we have the recommended rate increases for right now and then 4% every year after, what would it take to have ending balances that are close to the target balances that we wish to have?
So
I mean, would that be 5% every single year or 4.5%?
So Director
And
Sethy,
so I would like to know what it takes for us to be close to the target balances over the term of the period.
yes,
that we're
so
looking at.
the two options that we will present tonight will provide those information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's the one of the key things that we're trying to accomplish with those financial planning model runs that we'll go into a little bit more detail here. And just I'll remind the board too that you'll be able to ask for any assumptions, any outcomes and what it would take to get to those outcomes later in the evening.
Another follow-on thought on the ability to understand what the state regulatory requirements are for our district is I've suggested that we also add an additional column for the ability to water market, to make funds over our ability to sell the water that we have access to, and trying to get a capture of how much water we have available for sale and what our potential income could be from that, being a true enterprise district and marketing our water would be. The next issue is catastrophe. What is our ability to respond to a calamity where suddenly our water revenues dropped off the cliff? The example there is Paradise. Paradise had voted in to put the bulk of their charge on the fixed charge. The voters objected at a ballot initiative and made them go back to be heavy on the commodities, low on the fixed charge. Then the campfire came along and they were economically devastated. They had no reserve, they had no mechanism built into their structure to be able to respond to a calamity. So that'll be more a point in the next meeting, but at least having some parameters so we can work with would be helpful.
Any other questions from the board? If not, I do have a couple of questions. Going back to slide 8, you touched on the settlement that we received from PFAS litigation. Is that the entirety of what we're expecting to receive from that litigation, or is this just a partial payment?
It's a great question, and that was the last big chunk of it. There's a little bit outstanding, but that was the last big one. And we weren't expecting them to come all at once like they have been over this last year or two.
Okay.
It was originally estimated we'd be getting them over 5 to 10 years.
And
Yeah.
do you know by any chance what we received in totality across the PFAS settlements? If not, we can follow
It's
up.
around, yeah, don't quote me, I can look up the specific number, but it's around 15 or $16 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. That's helpful.
But I can get back to you with that specific number.
That would be great. Thank you.
And I will say that there's multiple elements to that litigation. There are several cases. What Mr. Corinne is reporting on is sort of the big one. And so we've got most of what we expect in the way of proceeds from that. There are other cases that are still at play, much smaller amounts and so forth. And there's uncertainty in terms of sort of a second phase of the first litigation. So some of this is a little bit uncertain still, but what Mr. Corinne is pointing out that we actually received a little bit more ahead of what we expected in terms of schedule, and hence the change, the updated baseline here.
Thank you. That's helpful. One final question on slide 12. When we look at the projected bill demand, we jumped from 33.85 to 33.94 MGD, very modest increase there. What's that attributable to, and why do we level off after, 2030, I believe?
Yeah, it's attributable to the amount of development staff is expecting.
Okay, so we're expecting that even with additional infill development or redevelopment, we wouldn't see any significant increase in projected bill demand?
Correct, because there's so much conservation already built into all of the new projects.
Okay, makes sense.
Does that not also reflect the type of development? We're now up to 126 units per acre for approved projects in the city of Fremont versus 4 or 5 units per acre, which we've historically had in the development of the district.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
I will just take a quick pause to see if we have any questions from members of the public, both in person and online. If you wish to ask a question, you can do so now. If not, I'll turn it back to Mr. Corinne.
Thank you. So next up is our water revenues chart for the last 10 years. We've shown this during the budget workshop as well. And now it's updated for actuals for the for the end of fiscal year 26. As you know, we, as employees of the district, we can't control the weather or customer behavior, but we wanted to show this comparison of budgeted versus actual revenues for the last 10 years. So budgeted revenue, basically for the last 10 years, is about $1.1 billion. Actual revenue for that same time period, $1.1 billion. Actuals have been within 1% of budget. So over 10 years, the estimates have been higher by a total of $9.9 million, which amounts to about $1 million per year, or 1% of budget. So this is an accuracy rate of 99%.
And if I could add to that, because a lot of people are not familiar with this in the public, we went through a pretty wretched adjustment in our rates and the split between fixed and commodity charges at the beginning of 2017. And I was very much in favor of that. I was an advocate for that. And the result has been that we have revenues versus our forecast within 1% of forecast for 10 years in a row. That's quite an accomplishment for any district, any government agency to be that predictable in their revenues versus their forecast. And the reason I recommended those changes starting when I started on the board in 2010 was that this district suffered like other districts, where when we had recessions, revenues would drop dramatically. When we had droughts, revenue would drop dramatically. When we had both occurrences at the same time, it was even worse. We were on a constant roller coaster. And what I advocated for was that we get off that roller coaster and make sure that there was integrity in our revenue and that it was predictable against what our forecast was. I'm very proud of that accomplishment on behalf of the entire board and staff. It's an example for other water districts across the state in terms of how to properly manage your finances. Thank you.
Well, I could pull on a little bit on that. When you came on the board, our service charge was 9% of the total bill. Our actual costs are probably closer to 80% of the total bill. So we've made a partial step. We still need to use staged rates during a drought because we're not in sync. We haven't matched our fixed cost to fixed income and our variable cost to variable income. We've made progress. Hopefully we can make more.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the compliments. And from board policy and then also members of staff, water resources staff is very excellent at projecting how much water we need to produce. Right? And they're very good at understanding the customer base. So kudos to them. And as you just mentioned, Director Weed, this is just a brief summary of the financial trends for reliable revenue and the cost structure. So these charts illustrate the district's revenue and cost structure, as you can see on the bar chart on the left. Property tax, service charges, and consumption charges are what we consider to be basic reliable consumption, make up 91% of district revenues. And these revenues are considered to be reliable. The bar chart on the right shows that 46% of the district's costs are fixed. Including capital costs, that would mean 78% of costs are considered to be reliable expenses, while 22% of those costs are variable. And those variable costs purchase water. There's power for a few items like desal, takeoffs, and booster pumps, and other utilities.
I'll make one more comment here. And kudos to our engineering staff and their cost estimates. There was a time when the district had arguably overstated the projected engineering cost, which was a sense of job security for the engineering staff, to the point where the finance department was not accepting their estimates for from the engineering department in establishing the budget. We've corrected that now. We're finishing the projects in a timely manner, on time, and not putting more on the plate than we would rationally achieve. So it's been a huge help in our budgeting process for the work being done by engineering and their cost estimates.
Thank you. So this next chart shows actual general fund revenues, which are the blue bars, compared to budget, which is the red line over the last 10 years. As you can see, they are generally in line with each other. Differences are usually attributable to additional revenues, such as PFAS settlements that we just discussed, or grants and reimbursements, which are subject to capital project timing.
I would argue that the fixed charge should match the fixed and capital cost, and a variable one should only be the commodity level, which is where it is, and recognize that we achieve our meeting our budget during a drought through conservation, which is remarkably inexpensive. It's all voluntary and people respond. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have general fund balances over the last 10 years. Again, actuals are the blue bars compared to budget, which is the red line. You'll notice the budget red line decreases starting in fiscal year 23, and this is purposeful to spend down reserves to fund capital projects. Also, you'll notice fiscal year 24 is the only instance over this time frame of finishing the year lower than budget, and this was specifically due to capital projects actually going over budget. That's the year that we were finishing a major project ahead of schedule. So we spent $6.7 million more that year, and that year water revenues were below budget. But then you can tell the next year we make it up. It's all timing. All right, with that, I'll pause, see if anyone has any questions.
Start with the board. Any questions or comments so far?
I'll throw one out. Our conservation, I did not support an enhanced conservation effort on the part of the district where we hired additional personnel, feeling that it was a net, it didn't match what our financial needs were. And conservation cost us. Not only are we spending the money on the conservation efforts, but the lost income and what our projected income should be, which has no impact at all on the environment because the water is there. So we shoot ourselves in the foot by having an enhanced conservation effort. Thank you.
So Director Weed, if I may, I disagree with that assessment. Conserving water is actually one of our cheaper water sources versus go out somewhere to buy water on the spot market. So conservation actually is a great way for us to make up, to serve our customers without overly increase the cost. And this is not the right place for it. I got it. I see the look. So I think when we're talking about rate structure, we could have a more detailed discussion, including where the fixed charges go. We'll have a great discussion, but I'm just wanted to put it on table that I do disagree with your assessment.
Well, we have long history and predictable that if we ask people not to use water, they won't. We were in a situation going all the way back to Matt Whitfield, where he got on national publicity back in the 1970s, begging people to start flushing their toilets and using water because our revenues were in dire straits. So we haven't encountered that for a while, but we can hopefully keep it in perspective. And conservation for the sake of conservation does not have a rational business basis. Thank you.
I have to say I disagree with that, Director Weed. I'm more partial to Director Huang.
I'll be waiting for that conversation in the future.
Yep.
Yeah, we can have more of a lively debate on this at a later time. Any questions, comments from the board? Otherwise, I'll turn to the public. Anybody online or in person may ask a question or make a comment now if they wish. If not, I will turn it back to Mr. Curran.
Thank you. All right, so next up is Cassandra Cow, our new senior financial analyst, who will present the water rates survey results in the following bill comparison charts.
Thank you, Mr. Curran. Good evening, board members and the public. I'm here to present the rate survey. And then this chart compares my monthly bills for 31 survey agencies. The bars are ranked by total bill and are broken out into service and commodity charges. The bills are based on 16 HCF consumption by monthly and a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter. This comparison is based on the July 1st, 2026 data. I apologize, this note was omitted from the presentation received earlier this week. The district's currently bi-monthly bill is at $155.03, while the median bill is $216.78. If you look at the median line in the middle right here, the district is well below the median and remains one of the most affordable agencies. Assuming a 5% increase, the average bill is $162.80. With a 5.5% increase, the bill would be $163.56. And even at that level, the district will remain among the lowest cost agencies.
I have a comment here. This is my observation that goes back a long way, over decades, that the two cities that are below us, the city of Sunnyvale and the city of Pleasanton, subsidize their water rates and do not put money away for capital improvement projects. They have enormous deferred maintenance on their water systems. And in the city of Pleasanton right now, they're facing $50 million of upgrades that are absolutely necessary to the downtown, which is the heart of and heartbeat of Pleasanton for the retail environment. And they have to tear up the entire avenue and street downtown to put in new water mains. And what these cities do, and there are some above us that do the same practice, very irresponsible city council members that subsidize the rates, and then on the backside of their general funds, they fund the capital improvement programs and then charge the ratepayers on the property tax bill. That is not a fair comparison. So I would argue that our rates are actually the lowest in the Bay Area because it does include all of the capital improvement projects that we have to do and all of the standard operating maintenance that we have in our system. I want to make that very clear to the public that we're comparing apples and oranges here when it comes to these rates. Thank you.
All right. This chart shows the change in the monthly bill from 2017 to 2026. The ranking reflects the total typical change across the 31 surveyed agencies. This chart uses the same assumptions as the prior slide. You'll notice that the several agencies are marked with asterisks because the full rate was not conducted during 2017. 2018 rate data was used for those agencies. As a result, their cumulative increase appears slightly lower. The district's bi-monthly bill change is $40.44, while the median bi-monthly bill change is $85.97. You can see that in the middle right here. As you can see, the district's change is less than half of the median change. This shows that this district has one of the smallest changes. This chart shows the change in percentage by monthly bill from 2017 to 2026. Across the 31 agencies surveyed, the median by monthly bill change is 64%. Let's see, it's right here in the middle. The district's 10-year change is 35.3%, which is well below the median. As the chart illustrates, the district's rate increase continues to remain well below the median, placing the district among the most affordable agencies in comparison. This slide provides the history of the district's rate increases over the last 10 years. And since July 2017, a typical customer bill using 16 units of water saw a 35.3% increase as of 2026, which is 3.4% increase per year. In 2021, the board approved a rate holiday, and in 2022, the rate increase was 6% service charge and 0% volumetric for a net increase of 2%. So how does the district compare? Over the past 10 years, the typical customer bill increased 35.3%, while CPI over the past 10 years increased 34.2%, and construction cost index increased 34%. Of the largest 10 water providers in the state, rate increases have ranged up to 95% over the past 10 years. Since 2017, the district's cumulative rate increase is among the lowest of the 31 surveyed agencies. Even with the baseline scenarios of 5% and 5.5% increase, the district will still remain one of the most affordable agencies. That concludes my portion of the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Excellent presentation, first of all. I like the data. I want to add that last year, Bosca did a survey of all of its members that are using Hetch Hetchy water as to the affordability of water around the Bay Area. And what they showed is that over 20 to 25 years, that water has actually become much more affordable around the Bay Area over time. Every year it's become more affordable as household incomes have gone up. So the percentage of a household budget that goes toward water has gone well below national average and state average around the Bay Area. And these are all favorable indicators, even though we see San Francisco right now doing, close to 7.4% increases on Hetch Hetchy supply that we use. So there's good news in general. And one of the other observations that came through on the Bosca report is that people are spending a lot more of their disposable income on entertainment, trips, restaurants, applications on their cell phones, sports, all kinds of other things where the cost for an average household has gone up disproportionately to income. So I think that the news on water is actually very favorable for the entire Bay Area, even in the lower income areas that we have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point on San Francisco, it's 20% of our water supply, so it impacts our budget. Since Bosca was founded in 2003, the water costs of San Francisco have increased 600%. So in 20 years. And they project 100% increase in the next 10 years, 7% plus every year for the next 10 years. They're currently at $6 a unit, $2,600 an acre foot. And there will be doubling that to about $13 a unit, somewhere in the area of $6,000 an acre foot in 10 years. That dwarfs anyone else's water cost in the area. It is the finest water supply with single digit hardness, and it's something we need to protect. And the real irony of this is that the conservation efforts, their number of water units they're selling continues to drop, and the conservation has become an existential threat to one of the finest water supplies we know, and the alternative is sewage, which they're supporting. It's amazing. Thank you.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I really like slide 23. It's actually really good at a glance for our customers to see why we need to raise our rates and the percentage of increases. In the past, we have told our customer, it just gets so expensive, everything goes up, everything gets really expensive. It's actually really nice to see the details and the breakdown, so thank you.
Thank you.
I'll look to members of the public as well. If you have questions or comments, you can either approach the speaker's podium or raise your hand in the Zoom app. Seeing none, I will turn it back to staff.
Okay, now I'll hand it over to Mr. Karan.
All right, I'm back. You're going to hear a lot of me tonight. Oh, thank you, Ms. Cow. Now we'll provide one last comparison before we dive into the rate setting scenarios. The table above compares key cost drivers for a shorter time frame from July 2021 to July 2026 and illustrates that the district is subject to the same cost increases as our peer agencies from utilities, consumables, and other resources that we rely on. The district continues to make efforts to mitigate the effect of increases in these costs. For example, you'll notice the costs are ordered in by percentage change from highest percentage to lowest percentage of these particular cost drivers. Water treatment chemicals, that's based on a median per unit of all the different chemicals that the district requires. Those went up 148%. And yet the district is part of a regional consortium to ensure the best possible pricing for chemicals. And you'll notice diesel is up nearly 90%, unleaded about 60%, and fuel is competitively bid, while the district's fleet is transitioning to more fuel-efficient vehicles. Next up are power costs, which are up 48%. And power costs, as you know, are being addressed with the district-wide solar panels, and these are helping. And we get to water purchases, as was just mentioned, San Francisco, over this short time frame is up 41%, and again, another 7.4% increase in each of the next 2 years, while the state water project is up 35.7%, so very close to the district. Then you'll notice cost of living adjustments and consumer price index are running neck and neck. They're keeping up. And then finally, the last one there, labor and benefits. This is total labor and benefit costs. And because we're showing July through July, that's the data. This is as of the June 30th, right before. So it's literally the day before data. So July 2021, 59.2 million up to 68.4, an increase of basically 15.5%. And that's for actual staffing levels, right? So we had in 2021, 236 FTEs, but there were 8 vacancies. This year, 243 FTEs with 20 vacancies.
I just wanted to make a quick comment, kind of echoing what Director Huang said earlier. I really like this slide, and I hope that we include this in future presentations as well, because I think it helps contextualize for the public what's driving cost increases, how are we kind of rationalizing that, and then they have a data point to compare to when they're looking at other things in their lives that might be getting more expensive. How is water comparing to that? So I just wanted to express my appreciation to staff for including this context.
Thank you.
For me.
All right, can we move on to rate setting scenarios? So on the screen now, we're showing the baseline financial planning model again with the updates we discussed earlier. So updated for the actuals for last year, plus the Water Resources Master Plan projects during this time frame through fiscal year 35. This is just a refresher since we've already discussed this. Again, the baseline maintains 5% in year 1 and 5% in year 2 rate increases, 4% from fiscal 29 on out, $20 million per year interim financing, and these things were included during the mid-cycle budget discussions. So with the updates now, the ending cash balance drops to $77.6 million below target in fiscal year 35, and the resulting debt coverage ratio is 3.43 in fiscal year 31. So staff evaluated the baseline rate assumption of 5% and 5%, as well as other scenarios ranging from 5% up to 6.5%. As we will see when we get a chance to play with the model a little later, there are 2 primary financial drivers. Number 1 is the rate change, and 2 is capital spending. So these 2 drivers have a major impact on 3 main results: interim financing and the revenue bond issuance amounts, number 1. Number 2 is the debt coverage ratio and the debt service amounts, And number 3, the bottom line, the general fund balance. So based on staff's evaluation, we focus on 2 main rate options. Option 1 is the 5.5% in years 1 and 2, and option 2 is 5% in years 1 and 2. So each, sorry?
A point I think of import because of its size. We do not show the state water tax in this presentation because it's not part of our rate structure and evaluation. That's to pay for the construction, a major portion of the operational cost of the state water plant. We do pay a fee for the state water delivered. But we have a separate source of income, which is on the property tax bill and ad valorem tax. We're looking at a $21 billion tunnel project in the Delta. EWR has been turned down by the appellate courts in trying to get that validated as being part of the state water plan. So I don't believe we've costed in our 1.5 or 1.25% share of the $21 billion plus interest into that element. And it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Unless they get the validation ruling overturned or reversed, that's going to have to be put into future rates. If we stay, we've yet to sign up to the Delta Water Project, as no one has. But our share of the commitment now is about 1.25%. They're undersubscribed, so that may go up to 1.5% to 2%, depending on how, or at least 1.5%, depending on how they get the full subscription.
John, that's why it's not in the financial plan right now, because we don't have a validation. We don't have a pure project.
Without the validation, it goes into the rates. Right now, it's out of the rate structure. If we don't get, if we, under the current situation, we should be looking at as an additional 1.5%.
If and when it is approved.
$50 billion.
If and when it's approved, then we can put it into our forecast.
Yeah, or to put something in our forecast that we haven't.
It's one of the black
committed to
swans.
that doesn't
Just a question, hopefully it's not getting off topic too much. When do we expect that project maybe be completed?
2045 or
So
something.
we're looking at something in 2045.
If
So
it
I think
gets underway right
if it gets underway right now, so let's just drop it. It's 2045.
That is the completion date, but the funding mechanism and our commitment for paying into it starts much earlier.
Correct.
If we approve
If we do it.
participation.
Yeah.
I think we
We're
could
off
table
that.
this discussion because our budget cycle is every 2 years and we do mid-year correction. If this really show up as an item, I am sure our staff would be the first one on it and tell us about the impacts.
It's worth a footnote.
Thank you, Director.
I will give an update to the board and community after the next Delta Conveyance Finance Authority meeting.
I think we should turn back to staff.
Maybe I'll just say this, at the risk of continuing that discussion, which I'm not proposing, but I did want to just mention, staff, we do look out well into the future in our financial planning model. What you're seeing here are the nearer years. This is not the entire model going out into the future. And in doing so, we do have to make certain assumptions about long-term costs, and we try and do our best, but this is, when you're talking about going that far out, you're talking a fair amount of crystal ball. Of course, we have made assumptions about design, construction, planning costs associated with major projects and so forth. So we do our best to include everything that we can without being unrealistic or having too much of a crystal ball. So I don't know if Mr. Coran or Mr. Cho want to correct that, but I just wanted to acknowledge that suggestion and the fact that we do forecast as best we can.
The other chart, which is not here, is our funded ratio. We had 10 years worth of reserves at one time based on how much our capital expenditures were. That's come down now dramatically. So at one point we had the money to purchase the N3 ranch. Unfortunately, we failed to do so.
Interest rates were close to zero too at that point.
Thank you. Didn't have to borrow, we had it.
Mr. Cho, did you have a comment? No, okay. All right, thank you. So now we get into the scenarios. Each of the options that we discussed each has a scenario. Scenario A is based on the current CIP expenditure spending amounts that are approved as part of the CIP. Scenario B is based on the average CIP spending from the prior 10 years plus the current 25-year CIP that includes the Water Resources Master Plan projects. So this average spending is about $59.4 million per year, and adding a CIP cost inflator to that based on annual inflation of 3.25% based on the last 10 years. So it's just as an example what would happen. So again, recall that the projects in the Water Resources Master Plan are preliminary and they're subject to triggers. The intent here is to provide a fully transparent picture of a range of potential outcomes from different rate options. Staff seeks direction on the rate options, not the scenarios. The scenarios are for informational purposes only to assist in the evaluation of the rate options. And later in this workshop, the board will be able to evaluate the options, scenarios, and assumptions live in the financial planning model. So rate option 1, scenario A, maintains the baseline assumptions plus updating for fiscal year actuals and the Water Resource Master Plan projects. So this is the baseline. Now, assuming a 5.5% rate increase for each of the 2 next years and then 5% on out, this would lead to $25 million per year in interim financing, or approximately $150 million through 2032 when we expect the financing. So as you can see, this leads to a low balance of $1.5 million below the target in fiscal year 34. And that equates to a debt coverage ratio of 3.37 in fiscal year 29. Now, rate option 1, scenario B, it's the same assumptions we just discussed, but just saying that showing the impact of average annual CIP spending and assuming the 5.5% rate increase for the next 2 years. This would lead to $16 million per year of interim financing, or a total of $96 million. This leads to a low balance of $1 million below target in fiscal year 35. And at that point, the debt coverage ratio would be 3.93 at its low point in fiscal year 29. And we have rate option 2, scenario A. This maintains the baseline assumptions and assumes a 5% rate increase for the next 2 years and then 5% on out in the financial planning model. This would mean $28 million of interim financing for a total of $168 million. This would lead to a low balance of $1.7 million above the target in fiscal year 34. And the debt coverage ratio in fiscal 29, that's the low year for coverage ratios, would be 3.09. We'll return to these again later in the presentation. Now we have rate option 2, scenario B. So this is, again, the 5% for the next 2 years, but then it would be 4% on out. And assuming $20 million per year of interim financing for 120 total. And this leads to a low balance of $4.4 million above target in fiscal year 35. Debt coverage, low year again, fiscal year 29. The coverage ratio would be 3.5. So there are no, in this particular option, there are no change to the rates or the interim financing from previous budget discussions that we've had. Later in the presentation, I will review the scenarios that include additional debt to get the general fund ending balance to meet the reserve target at the low year in the financial planning horizon. But before we get to that, I will turn it over to Fred Dilley, Senior Managing Consultant with PFM Financial Advisors, who's here in person. And then virtually on Zoom, we have Darren Hodge, the Managing Director, also with PFM. And they will provide an overview of debt financing.
For your presentation, just a quick comment. The chart we see now, which has under current years and near term, a comfortable margin, is the same chart I've seen for the past 30 years. There's something called the Planners Group. Oh. So trying to do for the next 4 or 5 years, which is really our only reasonable planning horizon, we're comfortable. We go out and every year it shows that we're going to be in trouble anywhere from 5 to 10 years, 15 years out, which never happens. So it's a remarkable experience that it's an inherent issue within the planning functions that you have this planner's drop and confining as you go out in future years. Thank you.
Thank you. And
So
I'm sorry, very quickly, if I may, I think I misspoke a little earlier. I'm not going to be presenting any additional debt amounts. We will be returning with just additional information related to the debt amounts.
No, it's fine. It just, same chart.
Oh, yeah.
Different years. The chart hasn't changed. Each time they reprint, we just shift everything down.
Correct, correct, Director Weed. I understand.
The same margins.
and-
Thank you.
I was simply referring to the fact that I had misspoke. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. I'm not adding any more debt. Okay.
So I just wanted to make it clear, staff is proposing two options. Option one is 5.5, option two is 5%. And the scenarios, you'll see scenario with A, that's how we have it on our financial planning model currently. And scenario B, that's assuming our actuals. So, but when you look at scenarios, consider that as a budget. So at this time, we're asking the board to give us direction on the rates, which is the options, option 1 and 2. And then after we see the actuals at later time, we'll come back and propose a different financing options. So at this time, we're asking you to look at option 1 and option 2.
You have two option ones and two option twos.
So
I'm not sure
that's
what
why I
you're
wanted to
referring
make it clear. There are scenarios, and scenario 1 is based on our finance planning model, and scenario B, that's based on our actual and our average. And if you look at it, we have a different interim financing for both scenario 1, scenario A and B. So according to like our budget and adding the water resource master plan, we assume the scenario A will be the one that we'll be proposing. However, as Director Weed mentioned, like we never see that cliff at the end. That's why we're showing you the scenario B for that purpose.
Pardon me, I'm confused. You have 4 different slides here with different scenarios, 2 option 1s and 2 option 2s. And I'm not sure what the staff is
So-
recommending. Of these 4
I-
slides, which are the
I think
2?
the focus here is, do you want the rate increase to be 5.5%, 5.5% for 2 years in a row? Or would you like the scenario that's 5% on year 1 and 5% on year 2? I think those are the 2 scenarios. Everything else is just how you move money and how you model it out or project it
So
out.
which are the 2 that the staff is recommending?
There's, if I could try and confuse things even more, I'll do my best. There's really staff is presenting 2 rate options. Those 2 rate options are 5%, 5%, and 5.5%, 5.5%. You're 100% correct. Wait a second. 2 options. I'm looking at 4 different slides, right? You have option 1, option 2, and then you have scenario A and B for each one. I just wanted to kind of clarify that those scenarios, those are really just financial planning model run outcomes. Those do not change the options. They don't change the rate, the rate amount. What they do is they evaluate that same rate amount, the 5% and the 5.5%, with different major input changes, right? And the key input change really is spending in the capital program. And Director Weed, sensitive to your observation over the years and the fact that there's never this planning cliff that seems to be projected all the time. That was one of the real reasons why we tried to bracket those outcomes with different assumptions. The capital plan may not be spent according to, say, the most recent CIP plus various water resources master plan projects at very specific time frames at very specific amounts. Because remember, all that is very uncertain right now. So we tried to have a range of scenarios. But again, the scenarios really shouldn't, we're not asking, hey, board, which scenario do you want? We're more interested in the rate proposals themselves or the rate options themselves with the understanding that, you can see some of the potential outcomes with those scenarios, A and B. So hopefully that confused things even more.
I will give a quick take that, going through all four slides, I would, not saying this is determinative, but I would probably favor rate option 2, scenario B, 5%, 5%, 4%, with the $120 million financing. I think that's what I would go with.
So maybe let's just start on that end of the board and let's just get some feedback.
I am with Director Sethy because I looked at the CPI-U for June and the percent difference is about 3.8%. So going up to 5%, I understand that's what we looked at when we initially started down this process, but 5% is about my comfort level. So I'm definitely with the 5%, 5%.
Director Gunther?
I could live with the 5%. I would also be comfortable with the 5.5. I think it gives us a little more balance and leeway. And certainly could drop to a 5 if we had to. However, that said, if the other board members want a 5, I'd certainly be willing to go along with that. I'm a little more on the 5.5. Things have been increasing, everywhere, and I don't want to overburden the ratepayer, including myself. But I'm a little nervous about where we're going in the next year or two. Things are, unstable. I think we've been doing a great job in our budgeting. It doesn't surprise me that our lines always seem to line up every time. That's great news because that means we're doing the right thing. We're adjusting.
I might add something. I hope I'm not cutting you off.
No.
The reason I would go with 5%, 5%, 4% out is that we have a lot of borrowing capacity with AAA credit ratings from both Standard & Poor's and Moody's. So we're going to get the lowest cost of financing. And even with $120 million of interim financing, we still maintain a debt coverage ratio of 3.5, which is well above our target. So I think we're doing the most responsible thing in terms of how we adjust the rates for our ratepayers versus leveraging our borrowing capacity. That's the way I look at it.
And I'm also good with that statement.
Director Weed?
This is important. It's a tendency to become a little cynical at the process. 2 years is an incredibly short planning horizon for a rate cycle. So fine, we're not going to, and the difference between 5.5 and 5 is a very thin margin. So either or all of the above work. I would hope that by looking at our rate structure, that we'll be able to go to a 5-year rate cycle. Come up with our rates every 5 years, not have to go out to the 218 process. That's self-inflicted because of the way we don't match our variable cost to variable income, our fixed cost to fixed income. We can correct that easily. But right now, comes equal. They're all about the same. Thank you.
Okay.
That was really poor French.
I think I'm also partial to option 2. What we've modeled and communicated to our ratepayers is to stay as close to a 4% annual increase year over year. If we are able to meet our target objectives with a 5% increase and still stay as close to that 4%, but maintain our general fund ending balances, still be able to fund our capital improvement program and all of the other kind of planned expenses that we have, I think that is more prudent, especially Director Gunther talked about a changing environment and a changing economy. And if we don't need to raise rates even more and, in my opinion, put that burden on our ratepayers, I would want to be a little bit more conservative with what our rate increase looks like. So of these options, I would lean more towards that 5.5. And between even the two scenarios, I know you're not looking for that much feedback, but I would be partial to scenario B.
Thank you.
I will just pause and see if we have any questions or comments from members of the public as well, either in person or online. Seeing none, I'll look to staff. For this point, did you get the appropriate feedback that you were looking for from the board?
You just provided some key information. Sorry, Calvin. So yes, this is helpful. We got a little ways to go. We do want to make sure the board is considering all of the information, since an important part of the board's overall really capital funding strategy has to do with debt. And that's why we have some additional information, so the board, again, fully informed related to what the future related to debt is, including, maintaining our great AAA rating and so forth. So we want to make sure that we cover that too, but this has been helpful input so far.
So I will turn it back to staff. I want to see if we don't have a request for a break, then I'll keep us going till about 7 p.m. But if we have a request, we can break now. Oh, we'll keep going. Okay, so I do want to take a break at 7 p.m. because an hour and a half, I think it's reasonable. So I'll turn it back to staff.
Okay, thank you very much. So again, I'd like to invite Fred Dilley, Senior Managing Consultant with PFM Financial Advisors, as well as Darren Hodge, Managing Director at PFM, virtually.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Good evening, board. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So, as mentioned, we'd like to talk about debt tonight and provide an overview of debt financing. And what we want to start with is really an overview and the implications of issuing debt. So, let's begin with how and when debt is used and what are the benefits before we get into the implications. So utility can issue debt for a number of reasons, but the primary reason that utilities issue debt is when we don't have enough net revenues or reserves available to fund our CIP project needs. And essentially, the reason why debt is used for capital purposes is because debt essentially accelerates future revenues to today to pay for projects. It's very similar to when an individual goes out and tries to purchase a home and uses a mortgage. We don't have enough money to pay for the house in cash, and so we take out a mortgage and we spread the payments and the cost of that mortgage over time to make the home affordable. Now, what are some of the benefits of issuing debt? We'll go through a few. The first is that it can accelerate projects, the delivery of capital projects, which can essentially potentially reduce the cost of the project when you measure it against inflation. Because if we're solely pay-going a project and it's a large project, we might have to wait years to accumulate enough money to pay for that project, in which case the cost of that project is increased year over year. Another reason that debt can be beneficial is for intergenerational equity purposes. Debt service is paid over a longer period of time as opposed to pay-go funding, and so it allows for a more equitable payment of these project costs by generations that benefit for the project, not just the ratepayers today, but the ratepayers for the next 30 years. And as I mentioned before, the final benefit of debt is that it allows for these project costs to be spread out over a longer period of time, typically up to 30 years, which from a rate setting standpoint allows us to potentially increase our rates in a more gradual manner while preserving our cash position. If we turn to the next slide, now I want to talk about some of the implications, because it's as important to talk about the implications as it is the benefits. One of the main implications of issuing debt is that it reduces our future capacity for projects because we have to pay interest. Anytime we borrow money, we don't just repay the amount we borrowed, we repay the amount of interest. In addition, when we issue debt, the investors that we lend to, they have certain contingencies and restrictions that they place on us related to the amount of debt that we can borrow in the future and our rate setting capabilities to an extent. And one of these restrictions they place on us is the additional bonds test. And the additional bonds test is a test that we have to meet to make sure that we maintain a minimum debt service coverage ratio before we issue debt. And then the second ongoing test is what we call a rate covenant. And the rate covenant just requires that we maintain a certain debt service coverage ratio every single year. Now, another consideration of issuing debt is that when we sell tax exempt debt, the IRS has very strict restrictions on what we use the money on and when we use the money. And one of the key restrictions that they place on us is the deadlines of how long we have to spend bond proceeds. And anytime we sell tax exempt bonds, it's very important and we're required to make a determination to tax counsel that we reasonably expect to spend 85% of the proceeds within 3 years. And so we have to be very strategic about when we sell bonds. And going back to the interest and repayment topic, debt issuance essentially reduces our future funding flexibility because you're replacing with what is a somewhat flexible cost, i.e. a capital project cost, with a hard cost, a debt service repayment. And when I say it's a flexible cost, I don't mean to offend the engineers, but with a CIP, we can often move a CIP cost from year to year, but with the debt service cost, we can't move those payments. Once that debt service cost is on our books, we have to make those payments. And so that's why we consider it a hard versus a soft cost. And so to sum this all up, while there are benefits to debt, we have to be very careful, measured, and considerate in terms of how we structure and sell bonds. And Martin, would you like me to pause before I move on to the credit section?
Let me make a
I
quick
think we
comment.
have a comment or a question from the
Yeah,
board.
first of all, we had a serious discussion earlier, a few years back on the hedge fund rules, which is the 3-year requirement to commit, not spend the funds raised by the bonds. And it's a rule to try and prevent arbitrage by a district in their issuance of funds. You have another alternative, which is commercial paper, which can extend that period of time out. And that, in the case of the San Francisco WISA program, $650 million in commercial paper on a eventually a $6 billion project. So we have some flexibility there. And then we have the cost of debt, because there's a certain percentage of the total amount that goes to the underwriters and consultants. So interesting factors. We have the good fortune of having a nice coverage on our debt ratios. Historically, as high as over 9 at one time. We're now down to looking at 3.5. Thank you.
One reason I request, and I like commercial paper, is that it allows us to time when we go out to the bond market and wait perhaps until rates come down. We just go out right away. You're going at the cost of debt at the current, let's say 10-year, 30-year rates. And if you take out commercial paper, it gives you, I think, more flexibility in terms of when you actually go to the bond market, and maybe can time it a little better. It's just a thought.
It also gives you time to size your project, get a much stronger feeling as to how much it's actually going to spend. Projects have a tendency to just escalate in cost.
When I look at other water districts like San Francisco and others that are using commercial paper, I think they strategically try to combine the different debt instruments that are available to, at some point in time, capture the lowest cost of money. That's my own thought and what I see demonstrated by other water districts. You concur or not? Give me a blank stare.
I agree. I think with commercial paper, that's a very useful tool to better time the issuance of debt with the project cost. Because with commercial paper, interim financing, whatever, revolving line of credit, commercial paper, as project costs come up, we can draw what we need to fund those costs. And then once we reach a limit on the commercial paper, or maybe the max of the program, that's when we issue debt to pay off the commercial paper. So it allows us to be a little bit more efficient and strategic on when we issue our long-term debt.
And the other reason I think what I observe from other water districts is that, and we've been in this crunch where we go out for bond financing, we've got to spend 85% within 3 years. The engineering staff is driven berserk because people are working overtime in the evenings and on the weekend. But if you, the beauty of using commercial paper and then going out for bond financing is you can back pay your projects that you've just completed. So you don't put the pressure on your engineering staff.
Exactly.
Is that understandable?
Yes, no,
Understand what I'm saying? You concur?
yes, I definitely concur.
Okay.
All right. So why don't we flip to slide 38 real quick? And as has been referenced, we'll kind of get to the punchline here. You've got the highest ratings that are attainable, but let's talk about why a credit rating is important. So anytime we issue public debt, we need to get a credit rating. And a credit rating is essentially an alphabetic or numeric symbol that is used by the rating agencies to give indications of credit quality. And when we talk about credit quality, really what it measures is the likelihood of timely repayment of debt service. That's the key component that the rating provides investors is what's the likelihood of timely repayment. Now, we'll talk more about how the rating agencies actually rate us within their criteria, but they use a variety of categories. And these categories very broadly can be the economic and demographics of our service area, what is our competition in the area, the strength of management, and some of our financial metrics, debt service coverage, as well as liquidity. And so once a credit rating is assigned, even though investors, sophisticated investors will do their own credit homework, they really do rely on the credit rating pretty heavily when they're making decisions on whether they want to purchase a security that's being offered to them and also at what interest rate they're willing to purchase. In general, the higher our rating is, the lower our interest cost is going to be. So the lower our borrowing cost is going to be. And if we turn to the next slide, as I mentioned before, this is the entirety of the credit rating spectrum. So across the three major agencies, you've got Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. You maintain the highest ratings possible from the two rating agencies that rate us, Moody's and S&P. So you have the strongest credit ratings, and it's a great achievement. If we turn to slide 40, I want to go a little bit more detail on exactly how the rating agencies look at our credit and within their criteria, how they arrive at the AAA rating. So as I mentioned earlier, ratings are determined by a number of economic, operational, and financial characteristics and metrics. Some of these are in our control, others are out of our control. And it's also important to recognize that typically a single one of these metrics won't necessarily determine our rating individually. It's often the entire picture. It's the entire pie that decides our rating. And the last thing that we'll talk about is that the credit criteria is an important part of the rating agency's ratings process, but it's also something that they look at in terms of our peer agencies. So when they look at what their models spit out in terms of what our rating should be, that's not necessarily the end of our story. They then also compare us to other peers and what are median levels to determine how do we stack up against others. And sorry, Fred, I was moving a little fast. I want to go back to 40 real quick. And so if we look here at S&P's scorecard, you can essentially think of S&P's rating criteria as two silos. There's an enterprise risk profile. That's about half of our final rating. And it measures things like the economic fundamentals, which is 45% of the weight of that category. It also looks at industry risk, market position, as well as operational management. And on the other side of the silo is the financial risk profile. That's the other half of our rating. And the two primary components of our financial risk profile are all-in debt service coverage and our liquidity position. So those are very important within the ratings process. And if now we turn to slide 41, as I mentioned before, the rating agencies will rate us according to what their criteria shows, but then they will also compare us to peer agencies. And so what we wanted to show here on 41 is an analysis that S&P put out that presented some of the median levels for two of those important credit metrics, debt service coverage in days cash. And so if we look at the top here, this is the median liquidity levels across utilities among the different rating categories. And so what you can see here is that the median level of days cash that AAA's maintained was 738 days, going all the way down to the just barely investment grade in the 200 days. Now, what this doesn't mean is that if we don't have 738 days cash on hand, we won't be AAA. Again, they look at everything related to our credit as a whole, but nonetheless, it is an important factor. And then when we look at debt service coverage at the bottom here, a similar analysis, but what you can see is that the median level of debt service coverage for AAA's is 2.7 times. And obviously, the district maintains coverage well above that, so it's very healthy. With that, before we move on, I'll pause again and see if there's any questions.
Good time to take a break.
I was
Before we go
thinking-
into the next
yeah.
stage.
I was just thinking the same thing.
I'll make one quick comment. It'd be interesting to see the same chart with Moody's. I understand that Moody's has only 15 districts in the nation that have a AAA rating, of which we're one. S&P 738. So two different standards entirely would appear. I understand Moody's also looks at legacy cost, which S&P ignores. Legacy liabilities.
Correct. And I will say in California, as far as I'm aware, there are only 2 water agencies that maintain AAAs from Moody's. And I believe that's yourself and East Bay Mud.
Correct. And another 13 in the nation.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I'd just like to point out, this is a nice conversation to have. In some ways, we're spoiled. What we've got here because of our staff and the decisions the board has made is where we're at. We're able to talk about AAA rating and bonding this stuff out. And I think sometimes we tend to lose sight of how we got here and the work and effort it took to get here, to get this rating, and to get this acceptance of, wow, these guys are good. And, we should take note of that not everybody can do this.
It's true.
Great. I'll just to members of the public, in person and online, if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, you may do so now. Seeing none, I think this is a good point to take a break before we get into our debt issuance scenarios. So let's take a 10-minute break. I have 6:58. We can return at 7:10. Okay, so it is 7:12 p.m. We are reconvening into open session, and I'll turn it back to, am I turning it to Darren?
Darren now.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Hodge, I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, you're muted, Mr. Hodge.
I'm sorry. Hopefully I'm off mute now.
Yes,
Yep.
there you go.
Perfect. One of the things that I wanted to address that I forgot to on page, when we go back to slide 41, I did want to just highlight that the district does maintain very strong days cash. You have about 511 days based off last fiscal year. So exceptionally strong cash position. Now what we want to go into, if we turn to slide 43, we're going to talk about some of the debt scenarios that we ran and want to start off with a discussion of where we stand currently in terms of interest rates. So what you're looking at on this, sorry, did someone have a comment?
Yeah, can we go back to slide 14, 41, please?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to mention, if you look at the top, you'll see the numbers AAA, AA, A+, and our numbers currently is 511. It's between A and A+. So currently we're spending down our reserves per board's direction. So that number is decreasing right now. And I just wanted to point that out. When we are spending down our reserve, that number will continue to go down. Like just a couple of years ago, we were at 700s, which is AAA, but now we are at 511. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, if we turn to slide 43, wanted to start off with a quick overview of the market. So what this slide right here shows is this is the AAA BVAL index. What that means is this is essentially the AAA tax-exempt index that we use to price tax-exempt bonds off of. And specifically within the graph, what you'll see is these gray bars. What that represents is the range that interest rates have fluctuated since 1990. So after over the last 36 years. And then what you'll see is there are blue bars right there. What that represents is the average rate over that time for every spot along the yield curve. And then there's a gold line. The gold line is rates as of July 17th. So essentially what this shows is that for the most part, we're pretty close to historical averages in terms of rates right now. And if we talk about where we arrived at these rates, over the last 4 years, rates have increased. Obviously, at the beginning of COVID, there were actions taken by the Fed to drive rates down, and that resulted in incredibly low interest rates. Over the past 4 years, we've seen several factors that have caused increase in interest rates. On the short end of the curve, the Fed increasing the Fed funds target rate, and then also concerns about inflation and just overall global uncertainty has pushed the rest of the curve up in terms of increasing rates on the medium and longer term end of the yield curve. But in general, still around historical averages. So the bond market is still very healthy for the municipal market. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fred for slide 44.
Thank you, Darren, and good evening, everyone. So I will be running through first an overview of the district's debt profile. So currently, the district has outstanding 3 series of revenue bonds. The Series 2015 revenue bonds, which currently have a par outstanding of about $5.9 million. The Series 22 revenue bonds, which have a par amount outstanding of about $33.6 million. And then the Series 2025 revenue bonds, which have a par outstanding of about $45 million. And so what you'll see on the right here is from the district's most recent audited statement, the debt service coverage ratio for fiscal 25. So you'll see that the district ended with a debt service coverage ratio of about 5.79 times, which is very strong. So as Darren alluded to previously in the presentation, when the district issues revenue bonds, it enters into covenants with investors. And so what these dictate are the requirement to set rates as well as the requirements to issue future bonds. So in regards to your rate covenant, the rate covenant essentially requires the district to fix rates, whereas your net revenues are sufficient to yield a 1.25 times debt service coverage ratio. And then on the additional bonds test side, in order to issue additional bonds, the district must ensure that with the addition of new debt, revenues are still sufficient to meet that 125 times debt service coverage ratio test. So what we put together here are some indicative capacity analysis, just looking at your capacity to issue future debt. It's worth noting that these are based off of forecasted metrics and that actual debt issuances would require further conversations with district staff. So what we first look at here is the district's capacity to issue additional debt based off of the amended mid-cycle budget and issue down to that 270 debt service coverage ratio. As a reminder, that was the amount in the previous slides, which was the AAA median for that metric. And so based off the amended mid-cycle budget for fiscal 27, you'll see that the district has approximately $5.5 million in additional debt service capacity to reach that 2.7 times coverage ratio. And what this translates to is approximately $93 million in bond proceeds to fund new money projects.
So let me ask a question. If we did that scenario where it was 5%, 4%, we borrow 120 million. Instead of 93 million, we borrow 120 million. We're going to drop the debt service coverage ratio, right?
So it's worth noting that this is just for fiscal 27. So this doesn't take into account any future rate increases right now.
I see. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And so on this slide, what we include is then looking at the capacity to go down to the previously set minimum coverage target. So there was a previously set minimum debt service coverage ratio target of 2.0 times. And so essentially, to get down to that 2.0 times debt service coverage ratio, the district has additional borrowing capacity of 10.2 million in terms of annual debt service, and that translates to approximately $172 million in bond proceeds. And so finally, what we show here, this is just to illustrate the district's borrowing capacity over time. This uses the forecast that was provided to investors as part of the part of the 2025 revenue bonds that we issued. And so what we've essentially shown here is on top of the capacity that we just pointed out in regards to that, the 2027 capacity to go down to 2.0 times. The district would have an additional $5.8 million in additional debt service capacity in fiscal 29 as well, which equates to about $98 million in bond proceeds in fiscal 29, on top of that number that was previously discussed for the fiscal 27. So that concludes our section. Are there any questions?
So you're saying that over a 3-year period, FY 27 through FY 29, we would essentially have close to $270 million of borrowing capacity. Is that correct?
So that would be in the case that we were solving down to that 2.0 times debt service coverage ratio. Actual borrowing, we would speak with staff about what our target would be there, but that is essentially the maximum to borrow that you could borrow.
Maximum, the 172 plus the 97.5.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Question. Local city uses certificates of participation. Is that yet a separate category of financing that over and above what we're looking at here?
So we do have clients who are districts who issue certificates of participation. In this current market, they're essentially analogous to revenue bonds in terms of being issued by water districts.
But the asset that they have is their own facilities, which are paid for, and it gives them from a borrowing capacity, they're able to put up their own assets as well as their revenue stream.
Yeah, that is correct. So in terms of when a city issues certificates of participation, that's the structure that they enter into. When a water district enters into a certificate of participation, it essentially functions in the same manner as a revenue bond.
I think what John is trying to say here is if we do bond financing or even commercial paper, we're financing from our revenues.
That's correct.
Our debt capacity. But with certificates of participation, and I've used them in the past in the corporate world, is you're putting up your assets, not your revenue, to draw that money.
So
You're using your physical assets to draw the money.
So within a certificate of participation as it's structured for water utilities, it's not a COP in that sense. There is no asset that is backing the payments. What you're referring to is correct, a COP for a city where there's lease payments made on an asset that's part of that leaseback structure. But a COP for a water district is simply secured by revenues made under an installment purchase agreement, just net revenues. There is no physical asset that, let's say you don't make a debt service payment, that the lender could come and take or the trustee could release.
Don't we have the option for both? And
you do.
Particularly if we become an enterprise district and start marketing, acquiring facilities such as groundwater banks, similar to Irvine Ranch, which they went out and bought farmland and managed their own, where they own the water bank, groundwater bank. So the question, might there be some additional flexibility should we choose to go down that to investigate in the future?
Yes, you definitely have
what's the lowest cost of financing among all these different debt instruments?
Yes. So in general, revenue bonds are going to be our lowest cost of financing. And I think there's an important nuance that Fred hit on. In a stable market, in a good market, a normal market, there's typically not a difference between a revenue bond and a COP. In some markets, a COP might have a slight premium associated with it for the simple reason that on Bloomberg screens, when you're selling a bond, it will show up as a COP, and some investors can't or don't want to purchase a COP. So even though it's not a COP in the sense that they think it is, it nonetheless shows up and potentially has an impact on our ratings. So in a perfect world, we would always sell revenue bonds. But if we had to sell a COP in a normal market, probably no penalty. In a bad market, a couple basis points. One thing I want to hit on though is that if we were to use commercial paper revolving line of credit, we would issue the commercial paper revolving line of credit and then sell bonds to refund what was outstanding under the line of credit. The COP restriction is only applicable when we're selling new money bonds. So when we're refunding a line of credit, it's not a new money issuance, it's a refunding. So those will always be revenue bonds.
We're getting a real college course here in finance.
We're subject to, we're vulnerable to an earthquake or some other catastrophe or a fire, to an overwhelming loss of revenue, part because of our rate structure is so much based on commodity costs as opposed to fixed costs. And does that not put into the calculations of what our risk factors are on borrowing money?
So as part of the rating agency's analysis, they do include a section that essentially looks at, particularly in California, seismic risk is included as part of that assessment.
And we did take out a line of credit, which is, I think, has been beneficial to us here at ACWD. And it's not common among water districts. But we've had good fortune with that line of credit where and our staff can give the details on it. But we have tried the line of credit and it's been beneficial for us. Thank you. As a line of credit, not a commercial paper.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
So I guess I'll sort of jump in. I think the goal of this section is to talk about our ability, our capacity to borrow money. We haven't really decided how much or if we are going to borrow money, but if we ever get there, there are some interesting options that's been discussed. I would ask staff to bring back different possibilities using commercial papers, certificate of participation, or just go out for debt. So we could have this discussion later because this is at such high level for me to even think about it. I would like to see how much the pros and cons, what's the cost to us as a district, to our customers, and what are the implications. So the ask on your ask list is if we choose to go, if you're recommending or looking at the scenario to go out for new debt or to borrow money, we'll put borrow money, look at the different instruments and present the scenarios of pros and cons. All right, if we ever get there.
I would second that request.
I'm looking through the rest of the presentation here. And I'm just going to throw out an idea that when we talk about rate design and that kind of stuff, rate structures, that we might want to defer that to another meeting. I mean, we're covering tremendous amount here in one night.
We did have a bit of a powwow. We're planning to move through that material fairly quickly because we already received a fair signal from the board as to where the board is, the center of the board is with regard to rates and so forth. So we're planning to step through that pretty quickly.
That center is 80%.
Before we turn back to the presentation, just any questions or comments from members of the public? If not, I'll turn it back to staff and we can on with the presentation.
Long time ago.
Perfect. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Oh.
All right, long time no see. Thank you, Mr. Hodge and Mr. Dilly, for your clear explanation of the implications of issuing debt. Now we'll move on to the financial planning scenarios. We're going to be focusing on the effects of a potential rate increase amount and the use of debt to fund the capital program. So as promised, we're back to the various baseline slides as well as the rate options. So this again is just a review of the financial planning baseline after the updates. So it's what was budgeted and then updated for fiscal year end results, as well as adding the Water Resources Master Plan projects. And on each of the following slides, we'll be showing a lot of data. You'll notice in the table, we have net revenues. There's a line for additional debt service, and this includes the interest on the interim financing and also new bond proceeds to repay the interim financing. Then you see the amount of the interim financing proceeds and then the amount of the bond proceeds themselves that are used to repay the interim financing. And then the resulting debt coverage and the cash balances in the chart below. So on the current slide, we see the baseline scenario. And as you can see, we're adding $120 million of interim financing, and the bond proceeds lead to approximately $43.7 million of additional debt service. See that on the far right, showing the totals over the time horizon. A debt coverage ratio low of fiscal 31 of 3.43, and the cash balance low of $77.6 million below the target in fiscal year 35. The same exact metrics you saw earlier, just with some more detail. Now we'll jump into the rate options.
So just wanted to point out that last line that Mr. Curran talked about, that has the answer to the question that was asked earlier about, well, what do these scenarios look like? What is the resulting debt coverage ratio? So it's all right there in that last line. So we could probably move briskly.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. So rate option 1, scenario A, this shows the 5.5% rate increase for each of the next 2 years, followed by 5% on out, which translates to $150 million of interim financing, and then the same amount of additional bond proceeds to repay them. The additional debt service would be $54.4 million, and the debt coverage ratio low in fiscal year 29 would be 3.37. And cash balance low of $1.5 million below the target in fiscal year 34. So now rate option 1, scenario B. So this is the one that includes the average CIP spending. So it's the same exact one that we showed before, except now average CIP spending. So that translates to $96 million of interim financing, which is $16 million a year. And then the bond proceeds that match that. And that translates to $34.9 million of additional debt service and a debt coverage ratio low of 3.93 in fiscal year 29. And the cash balance is $1 million below the target in fiscal year 35. Move on to rate option 2, scenario A. This shows the 5% rate increase in each of the next 2 years, as well as the following years. That means there's $168 million of interim financing and bond proceeds, which leads to $60.8 million of additional debt service, a debt coverage of 3.09 in fiscal year 29, and a cash balance of $1.7 million above the target in fiscal year 34. And now rate option 2, scenario B, which is basically the budget, what the board approved, except with the average CIP spending to what we think might happen. And this is 5% for each of the next 2 years, followed by 4% on out, $120 million of interim financing and bond proceeds. And that leads to $42 million of additional debt service, a debt coverage ratio of 3.5 in fiscal year 29, and a cash balance of $4.4 million above the target in fiscal year 35. At this point, I would like to ask, is the board comfortable with the current options presented? And are you still interested in seeing the live model?
Can I make a comment again?
Mhm.
So what we're asking the board to decide tonight is between rate option 1 and 2. And just like the interim financing, which the staff will bring at a later time, to use like commercial paper or COP or bond, that'll be decided at a later time. Same thing with the scenario A and B. That'll be discussed during the budget cycle. So at this time, the staff is asking the board to only consider the options, not the scenarios.
I had made a comment earlier about our line of credit, which is not reflected here. Do we not then have an additional layer of protection with the line of credit in an emergency or event?
Yes, absolutely. The line of credit is already there, and there's no additional,
And how much is that currently?
well, it's $10 million for line of
Sorry?
credit. $10 million.
It's only 10. Okay.
Yes.
But I believe we have the option to increase that line of credit should we need it in an emergency situation.
Well, if
If
you
I
don't have
remember,
time in an emergency situation, you do the line of credit beforehand.
I think the
You gotta
reason
negotiate it.
No, it's expandable.
it's expandable.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We have an accordion clause that allow us to go to 50 million.
exactly.
So, and we say 10 million. The accordion clause, we can go after an event, we can go to the window of Chase and get up to $50 million.
I think it's 50 million more.
I thought it was 100 million.
From what I recall, and we can bring back some additional information if this is important. I don't think it really affects the rate structure or the decision related to rates. But my recollection was we have a $10 million line of
We're
credit.
paying for 10.
We're paying for 10, but we have an understanding with the bank. We have very good relations with the bank. We have an understanding with the bank that we could relatively quickly increase that amount to up to 50.
Yes.
So, but again, we can bring back additional information. Again, I don't think it factors into the rates process much.
Well, let me bring us back
Thank
to
you.
what the staff has just asked us to do. We're getting off on a tangent here. I would support still the same rate option 2, 5%, 5% for it,
So
without going into what the interim financing is.
I am okay with option 2, but I would like to see a planning scenario just for the record. So when I'm out talking to my community, a lot of time the question we are asked is, how come your rate increase is greater than CPI? Is it possible just run, and this is an ask, run the model again and see how bad it is if we keep a CPI, which I'll just say 4% instead of 3.8, just for the record, for the community to understand why we need to go above the CPI value, because yeah, I do hear a lot about your rate increases higher than CPI. It doesn't make sense. So just for the record, somewhere in the future, I would like to see that scenario, just so that, not only we justify why things are getting a lot more expensive for us line by line, we also have a projection out of the financial impact if we just stay at CPI without going a little bit higher. So please do that.
Director
Yeah,
Huang was
absolutely.
going to make the exact same request for a scenario, just showing what that 4 and 4
Right.
looks
It
like.
is the bookend,
It-
right?
Exactly.
It would be my pleasure. That's where I live, is in the financial planning model.
Hey, aren't you glad this year I'm not saying, let's do the line model and let me tweak this number and tweak that number? I'm behaving this year.
I could go along with option 2.
Okay, so just for my own clarification, we're not running the live model right now. We're going to get this communication at a later time. Is that correct? Or are we?
Yeah, so I'll look to staff to make sure that we're going to be fine. But we are prepared to run the model live and tweak whatever you'd like. We can also easily come back with the end result of our review of the model at 4%, and provide that to the board. So we're prepared to go either way. I just have I got the sense that the board would like to step through this material a little quicker. So whatever the board pleases is what we're here to do.
If I can make a suggestion for the board, I would say that we have staff run this model not live, they can send us that information. We have a few more rate hearings coming up where we still have room to discuss and negotiate. Is that fair?
I am fine with that, but I would like that information not just given to the board, but it's part of record, so
Sure.
our customer could access that information, and that is the only ask I have.
Yeah, now, one caveat I'll add is that, we're going to be doing a lot of additional work based upon the sort of narrower feedback we're getting from the board, which is what we need, so we appreciate that. However, we will provide the requested information, and we can do what we have to do to pivot as needed, but just want to make sure the board's aware is much of the following analyses are going to be based upon really option 2.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's understood. I really just want a baseline to compare to actually what you have in the scenario
Yeah.
right now, just so that there is a understanding of what it would look like
Yep,
without the 5% increase, right? If we
Got
pay
it.
a CPI.
we can easily do that.
Okay,
Okay, so not tonight, but another time.
exactly.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, then, at this point, that concludes my portion of the presentation. And thank you very much. And I will now hand it over to Mr. Cho to begin the next section focusing on the rate structure.
Thank you, Mr. Kran. We'll now turn into the district's rate structure. Mr. Sasser and I will review the district's current uniform rate structure, explain how tier rate operates, discuss the major decisions involved in designing a tier structure, and review the consumption data that will be necessary to properly evaluate the alternatives. We'll conclude this section with staff's recommendation regarding the rate structure for the upcoming rate cycle. The district currently uses a uniform volumetric rate. This means that each unit of water is charged at the same per unit rate, regardless of the customer's total level of consumption. Other water agencies use tier rates under which water used above specified threshold is charged at progressively higher per unit rate. Among the district's primary comparison agencies, East Bay Mud, Boring Municipal Water District, San Jose Water Company, and the SFPUC uses the tier rate, and Dublin San Ramon Service District and Contra Costa Water District currently use the uniform rates. The following slide provides an overview of tier rates as a potential future alternative. However, for the upcoming rate cycle, staff is recommending that the district continue its current uniform rate structure. Under a tier rate structure, a customer's metered water use is divided into a defined usage levels or tiers. Each tier includes a specified amount of water and corresponding per unit rate. Water used within each tier is charged at the rate established for that tier. And under an increasing tier structure, the per unit rate increases as the customer's consumption moves into the higher rates. It is important to note that entering into a higher tier does not cause all the customers' water use to be charged at the higher rate. Only the water used within that particular tier is charged at the tier's rate. There is no single standard design for tier rate structure. Tier rates can be developed in several different ways. The key decisions include the number of tiers, the amount of water included in each tier, the per unit rate charged within each tier, the basis used to establish the tier threshold, and the customer classes to which the structure would apply. This decision would need to be supported by customer and parcel-specific consumption information, together with the district's cost of service analysis. Therefore, evaluating tier rates involve a lot more than simply establishing a higher rate for higher consumption. The district will need to be carefully evaluate how the tiers would be defined and how the resulting structure would affect different customers. A meaningful evaluation of tier rate requires sufficient consumption data. The analysis would need to consider typical and seasonal water use patterns, potential tier threshold, customer bill impacts, the resulting revenue and cost of service implications. The district's advanced mirroring infrastructure system provides a high-resolution consumption data that will be valuable for this purpose. However, Based on staff review of the data currently available, collecting at least 2 additional years of AMI data will provide a more reliable foundation for evaluating tier rate alternatives. And accordingly, the staff recommends continuing the district's current uniform rate structure for this rate cycle and deferring further consideration of tier rate until additional AMI data is available. This recommendation does not eliminate tier rate as a future option. It would allow the district to revisit the issue with a more complete and representative set of customer consumption data. Now with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Sasser.
Good evening. Oh, I should. Okay, so I will be presenting on 2 areas. First, the rate structure and the resulting bill impacts associated with a uniform rate increase, and the second component being drought surcharges. So the district's existing rate structure is based on one customer class. All customers pay the same fixed charge based on the meter size. All customers pay the same consumption charge rate as well for their water use. Currently, that's $5.38 per 100 cubic feet. Under the projected rate option of 5% of a uniform increase to your existing rate structure, that consumption charge rate would increase to $5.65. Given the direction of the board tonight, or I should say the sentiment, I'm going to skip over the portions of the presentation regarding 5.5% rate increases. I can certainly double back if you're interested, but for brevity, I'll move on to just the 5% options in the remaining slides. As far as the rate structure rationale is concerned, the district employs this approach because it's easiest to maintain compared to other consumption charges structures. And it's also easy for customers to understand their bill. It's one single rate used for each drop of water. So moving on to the 5% increase slide. So I skipped one slide if you're following along. This is a bi-monthly bill impact. So what we've shown here are the bills for 3 sample customers, starting with single-family residential customers with a 5/8 inch meter. This is your most common meter size for those customers. A commercial customer with a 1-inch meter. This is also your most common meter size. And an irrigation account with a 2-inch meter, your most common size meter for this type of customer. For each of these 3 customer types, we've shown a range of water use from low to high based on the specific usage patterns of those typical customers. And so what this table shows is a comparison between what the customer among these 3 levels of water use pays according to their current bi-monthly bill, and compares that to the resulting bi-monthly bill column by applying the 5% increase to the existing rates. So you can see that the service charge has increased 5%, and you can see that change of 5%, and then the consumption charge being increased as well by 5% in that resulting change. And thus the total bill overall, as highlighted by the right-hand difference column, also shows a 5% overall a 5% overall increase. I'm going to move on to drought surcharges. The district's current approach is that to ensure that the district receives sufficient revenues to cover its cost of providing water service when consumption decreases due to a water shortage emergency, such as a drought, the district has adopted drought surcharges. Drought surcharges are set up incrementally to reflect the levels of water shortage emergency the district has defined in its urban water management plan, specifically the water shortage contingency plan. In a declared water shortage emergency, drought surcharges, as shown on a future slide, and if implemented by the board of directors, will be in addition to and on top of the base per unit water consumption rate. So having said that, the district's current methodology is that the surcharge is equal to the revenue deficit divided by the water supply associated with each shortage stage reduction. And the rationale for this approach is that this is a fairly simple approach to implement given the district's current rate structure of a uniform rate. It's simply an additional surcharge added on to your existing rate for service. And the ratepayer impact correlates with your customer's water use. Again, I'm going to skip a slide. If you're following along in your packet. This is the drought surcharge rate structure under a 5% uniform rate increase. So this table shows how we calculate the surcharge per 100 cubic feet at each stage. The stages are identified in the district's water shortage contingency plan. So if you're following the table from left to right, we have the specific stage and the demand reduction associated with that stage. There's consumption revenue, which is based on the 5% uniform rate increase applied to your volumetric rate. And so that'd be $5.65 multiplied by the overall volume of water that's expected to be sold. So that begins at 93.3 million. And then in order to calculate the surcharge, we're accounting for lost revenue when there is water savings and customers are purchasing less water. And we're also accounting for the district's cost savings as a result of having to purchase less water. And specifically, we've assumed that based on the state water project cost per unit of water. The revenue after these reductions is divided by the associated demand at each stage, and we determine the surcharge per 100 cubic feet. So I'll provide an example. Stage 2A assumes a 15% reduction. Beginning with 93.2 million, this means effectively that the customer would see a decrease associated of 15, or I should say the district would see a decrease of 15% of sales. If we also add on the $418,000 of cost savings, then as a net loss in revenue, that's a reduction of $13.5 million. And effectively, the revenue after reduction is $79.2 million. We divide the $79.2 million by the reduced demand of 14,036,053 HCF, and we determine a surcharge rate of 97 cents per 100 cubic feet. You can compare that to your current stage 2A rate of 92 cents per 100 cubic feet. The drought surcharges are only implemented by a decision of the board during a declared water shortage emergency. So I just want to reiterate that point. So with that said, are there any questions on the slides that I've just covered? I'll turn it back over to the board.
Thank you. I just have an observation. Ask the staff and GM perhaps. To refresh my memory, how many times have we instituted our drought surcharge? Since we've instituted drought surcharge ability. Once, twice? I don't know.
So 2 times in my memory over the last 2 major droughts.
Yeah. How many years is that over about 10 years?
Well, say for the last drought, which was effectively a 3-year drought, we had the drought surcharge in place for a relatively short time. I'm going to say it was less than a year. And the board took action, in fact, I think called a special board meeting to take back rescind those rates the moment it could. So I think that's something that's important for our customers to recognize, that there's a history of the board doing that.
Yeah, and that's my point is I think I remember in our last, I sort of remember the last time we looked at this, we had questions and people were like, what is this? Oh, you mean you're going to increase our rate? I think if we could put something in here that says, we've done this, here, we did it here. This is the only time we've done it. And this is why we do it. it might explain it a little bit better is, no, we're not doing this today. We've had to do this here and we had to do it here. And the factor is that, when as soon as we declared it over, it went away. I think that may knock out a few of the questions that I've seen online. If I remember correctly, we've had questions. What are you doing? Are you going to charge us this? And if we had something like that in the future, not tonight, not some of the future areas, that we can kind of add something in there that says, this is what this is. Instead of here, we talk about it, we say, we only do it if. We have a history now, and I think a pretty good one, actually, and the targeting has been right on, spot on with this stuff. It might be useful to just throw that in there.
Thank you for your comment.
Couple of thoughts. First drought surcharge, we had a 0 tier. And I would encourage us to consider 0 tiers in our rate structures as a whole. We not charge for the first unit or two of water across the board. It's part of an equity issue. We made a fallacious argument that we were instituting the rate surcharge to encourage conservation. We needed it for revenue. We had a deficient and defective rate structure, which required that we go into rate surcharges because we were not matching variable cost to variable income and fixed cost to fixed income. We're going to continue that practice. But in general, not going down the trail of tiers is a good thing. Thank you.
I'm just going
And also, if we were to do this in a rational world, we'd be giving volume discounts because the larger the quantity of any commodity, the lower the unit cost, except for water. And that's done for political purposes in trying to play a environmentalist game than it is to do a rational enterprise.
So I'm just going to say on the record, I disagree with Director Weed. I believe our rate structure is perfectly sound and supported by our operations, but this is not the place to discuss this issue, so I'm just going to stop right here.
Well, we have 80 MGD capacity in this district. And it was just said we're only programming 33 to 34 MGD. We have huge extra capacity.
Well, there's another director.
And
I
in
don't
50
think
years, we've only had a drought impacting our operations for about 4 months. And that's when the state went to a 0 allocation.
and we're going to have
We
another
couldn't get our
meeting.
money.
And we're going to
But
have
now they
another
said they
meeting
wouldn't
where
do
we'll
that
be
in
able
the
to talk
future.
about this.
The threat doesn't exist.
Not that we don't talk about this every meeting, but we'll have another meeting eventually where we could talk about this.
John, remember the center of the board is 80%.
You've come around in the past, such as getting away the ultrafiltration. We wasted $30 million on that, and you finally got the other 4 board members to come along.
We are
Some other-
definitely getting well off
We-
topic.
yeah,
I want to
thank
bring
you.
it back. I'm just going to make a quick comment on the rate structures we discussed. I think the board, staff, public all know I'm very much in favor of moving to tiered rates, but I do agree with the staff's rationale that we do need more data before we actually make such a monumental change to our rate structure. So for the purposes of this discussion, I am in favor of continuing with the uniform rate structure, and I appreciate the rationale that the staff provided for why they think we still need a couple more years before we can move in a different direction.
I will say this, just for educational purposes, there are a lot of places in the country that have reverse tiered rates, like what Director Weed is saying, where the more water you use, the lower the rate is that you're being charged. Because those are districts that have plenty of water. There is a rationale for doing something like that.
We don't have a water shortage.
Yes.
So
We are like those
I'm going to bring
districts.
us back. I also agree right now is not a good time to implement tier rate.
I just say for educational purposes, there are a lot of water districts in the country that have reverse
And I'm sure there's more water districts that don't have reverse.
Right, I'm,
That's not true.
so I'm just gonna leave it at,
There's reverse tiered rates.
All right, well, let's get
So-
back to
so
the topic at hand.
I'm
I
just
just want to.
bring us back.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm okay with going with uniform rate this time. Like President Akbari, I am inclined towards tier rate, but I do agree with staff recommendation that we do need more data because tier rates, the tiers needs to be justified. And right now, we just don't have enough data to do a robust tier rate. So I can go with that. As far as that site discussion about tier rate, taking it back, I think each district has very specific circumstances, right? Tier rates, each agency is different. We need to look at what's applicable to us at the right time, and that's where I'm going to leave it to.
I will open it up for members of the public. If you wish to make a comment or ask a question, you can do so now. Seeing none, I think we are right at the end, so I'll turn it back to staff, I believe.
Yeah, at this point,
Oh,
Thank
sorry,
you.
Mr. Stevenson.
yeah, great. Thank you, sir. At this point, we actually have just a recap here just to make sure that we filled out our scorecards properly. I will tell you, my scorecard doesn't have all of the spaces filled in under the rate structure nor the drought surcharges. So I don't know, Mr. Cho, do you want to go ahead and lead the recap or shall I?
Yeah, so again, staff is recommending to keep the uniform rate and wait for 2 more years for the AMI data before we go to the conclusion. And also, staff is also recommending to keep the current structure for the drought surcharges. And can we get board's feedback on
Alright.
those 2 topics?
So you heard from me. I'm okay with going with uniform rate structure, and I'm okay with your recommendation on drought surcharge also.
I'm okay with uniform. I now think we're gonna have some very interesting discussions about tiers in the future. See where they go, and I'm fine with the drought surcharge.
I'm okay with the status quo.
Well, again, at the 20% mark, I would encourage us on a drought surcharge to revisit what we did the first time around and have a 0 tier. The drought surcharge is charged for people who use above a certain quantity. And that's an equity issue.
I'm in favor of the drought surcharges and uniform rates.
Thank you. This to conclude, staff would like to recap the key areas where we are seeking board's guidance tonight. These include the financial planning assumptions using the model, the preferred rate setting options, whether to continue the district's uniform rate structure, and the proposed approach to drought surcharges. And what the staff heard tonight are board members were in favor of option 2. And again, we're not talking about the scenarios, option 2, and then uniform structure for the current rate cycle, and to continue the same approach to drought surcharges. Is this correct?
Yes.
Yeah, but just making sure that we have on the record, we will come back with information related to a 4% rate increase too, if we're talking about financial planning assumptions. So we'll bring that back. But my scorecard matches yours, Mr. Cho.
And the fifth board member has no problem with increasing our rates and in an appropriate manner.
And at this time, we would also appreciate any direction regarding additional information or analysis that the board would like staff to bring back during the upcoming workshops. And staff will incorporate tonight's feedback into the next phase of the rate setting process, including the 4%.
Is there anything the board would like to add?
No.
I would ask that when we come back that we have $1 per unit as a measure to compare with other entities. San Francisco is now at $6 a unit, going to 12 to 13. It'd be interesting to be able to have a comparative number of what we're talking about for $1 per unit. Thank you.
Okay, we'll do.
And I would note, and La Prisma Hills is proposing a drought surcharge of up to $20 per unit in their tiered rates.
So at the August 27 workshop, we'll review the capital funding strategies, including the use of commercial paper for the interim financing, the allocation between fixed and variable revenues, and affordability considerations. At the September 24 workshop, we will follow up on the board's direction from the first 2 workshops and discuss customer service, billing, delinquency practices, and seek confirmation of the final rate proposal to develop. And we'll also provide an overview of the formal protest process. And with that, staff is available to answer any questions and receive the board's guidance.
One more thought here on if we could include in your report a note or a paragraph on our ability to use a line of credit in case when we have a calamity or a declared emergency. Because there are many districts that look at having extra funding or coverage rates to be able to address the emergencies. We have another way of doing it, which is far better and less expensive and more timely than the proposed insurance policies being proposed now by JPIA. Thank you.
And I believe staff got all the recommendations, and I'll turn it back to Mr. Stevenson.
Well, that is it for this evening in terms of this topic. Next on the agenda would be general managers reports. I have no general managers reports, so that moves us to item number 6 on the agenda.
I just want to, as we close out, just thank Mr. Cho, Mr. Karan, Ms. Kao, Mr. Hodge, and Mr. Sasser, and everyone else who is involved in tonight's presentations. There was a lot of information we packed in today, and so I just want to say thank you for all the work that went in. It is now 8:05 p.m., and we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Thank you, everyone.